They arrived without light, without sound, without ceremony. The alien unit phased into existence above the sleeping continent like a thought too subtle to notice, their bodies slipping between wavelengths, their presence erased from every spectrum humans knew how to measure. To them, Earth was already conquered, not by force, but by irrelevance. A world that could not see you could not stop you. Commander Threxel hovered inches above a human city street, his form bent around itself by active cloaking fields. Vehicles passed through the space he occupied, their sensors blind, their occupants unaware. He watched them with professional detachment. Soft bodies. Narrow vision cones. Crude machines. This species relied on eyes and instruments. Both were easily deceived. The doctrine was proven. It always was. His unit fanned out, 6 operatives moving like ghosts through infrastructure hubs, military installations, and data centers. They stood beside generals as strategies were discussed, drifted through armories cataloging weapons that would never fire, and walked through crowds that parted without knowing why. The humans felt nothing, no chill, no pressure, no instinctual warning worth respecting. Threxel recorded the results with a faint pulse of satisfaction. Planetary awareness level. Negligible, he transmitted. Proceed with observation phase. This was not an invasion. Not yet. First came certainty. Certainty that no one could perceive them. Certainty that resistance, when it came, would be disorganized and futile. Threxel had overseen dozens of worlds at this stage. The pattern never changed. And yet, in a subterranean facility carved beneath layers of reinforced stone, a man sat alone in a dim operations room, staring at a wall of data he wasn't officially supposed to access. His name was Elias Ward. He held no rank that impressed anyone, wore no markings that drew attention, and spoke rarely unless spoken to. To most, he was background, useful, quiet, forgettable. Elias leaned back in his chair, eyes unfocused, listening not to the numbers on the screen but to the absence behind them. Years of conflict had taught him that danger rarely announced itself. It hid in gaps, in delays that were too clean, in systems that behaved perfectly when they shouldn't. He zoomed in on a live feed from a surface camera. Nothing unusual. Street traffic flowed. Heat signatures aligned. No anomalies flagged. And still his jaw tightened. He switched feeds. Another camera. Another. All clean. Too clean. Elias stood and walked closer to the wall display, as if proximity might reveal what logic refused to show him. He had grown up learning to hunt without seeing, tracking by sound, by disturbed dust, by patterns animals left behind without knowing. Later, in war zones, that instinct had sharpened. Ambushes felt wrong before they became visible. Threats pressed against the mind before they reached the eyes. He keyed a private command and overlaid environmental data, air pressure, micro-vibrations, ambient interference. The system hesitated, then complied. A faint distortion rippled across the composite image. Not enough to trigger alerts. Not enough to matter to anyone else. Enough for him. Above ground, Threxel paused mid-observation. One of the human surveillance systems had shifted parameters without authorization. Minor. Likely automated. He dismissed it and continued recording. On the street below, Elias exited an unmarked building and blended into pedestrian flow. His hands were in his pockets, his posture loose, his expression bored. He walked 10 steps, then stopped. People flowed around him, annoyed murmurs rising and fading. Elias didn't move. He tilted his head slightly, eyes unfocused, listening to the city and to the space just beyond it. Threxel drifted closer, curiosity pricked despite himself. The human was looking in the wrong direction. Humans always did. Elias took a slow breath and stepped sideways. He should have collided with nothing. Instead, his shoulder brushed resistance, soft, yielding there. Threxel recoiled instinctively, cloaking fields flaring to compensate. His heart rate equivalent spiked. Physical contact was impossible. The probability matrices rejected it. Elias smiled, small and private, as if a long-suspected truth had finally confirmed itself. He turned, Not quite toward Threxel, not quite away, and spoke under his breath, his voice barely louder than the traffic. Thought so. Threxel froze. Audio input registered. Linguistic parsing engaged. The human hadn't shouted, hadn't gestured, hadn't used any device. He had spoken to the space Threxel occupied. Across the city, animals began to react, dogs growling at empty corners, birds scattering from nothing at all. One operative reported a sudden spike in biometric stress. Another requested clarification on mission parameters. Threxel forced himself to remain still.
Humans talk to themselves.
They muttered.
They guessed.
This meant nothing. Elias took another step, deliberate now, testing. The air resisted again. His smile faded, replaced by focus. "You're not reflections," he murmured. "Not glitches either." Threxel transmitted a tight command for diagnostic checks, his confidence eroding by degrees too small to admit. The doctrine insisted invisibility was absolute. The data said the same. The human disagreed. Elias leaned closer, his voice calm, almost friendly, as if addressing a skittish animal rather than an unseen invader. "You don't belong here," he said softly. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Commander Threxel felt something he had never recorded in any report. Not exposure, not danger, but the unmistakable sensation of being noticed. And somewhere deep within his processing core, a forbidden thought surfaced, brief, unwelcome, impossible to erase. What if this world had never been blind at all? The question lingered as the human walked on, unhurried, leaving the invisible unit behind in the open air, unseen and no longer certain they were safe. Elias did not report what he had felt. He returned to the facility with the same unremarkable gait, passed through biometric gates that recognized his face but not his thoughts, and took a seat as if the world above ground had not just changed shape. Experience had taught him that the fastest way to lose a truth was to hand it to people who needed permission to believe it. Instead, he listened. The data streams flowed as before, stable, clean, obedient. Too obedient. Elias layered them in his mind, not as numbers but as behaviors. Air that corrected itself too quickly. Sound that dampened where it should echo. The city breathing around something that refused to leave a trace. He closed his eyes and remembered a lesson learned long before uniforms and classified access. If you can't see the predator, stop trying to see. Let it move. Let it make mistakes. Above the streets, Commander Threxel ordered his unit to tighten formation. The human's words replayed in his auditory memory buffer, stripped of tone and reassembled 100 times. The sentence carried no threat, no technological marker, no detectable weaponization. And yet it had pierced the veil that had never failed them. "Maintain observation," Threxel transmitted, masking his unease. "The human has no confirmation." The lie tasted inefficient. Elias rose and left the operations floor. He descended into maintenance corridors where cameras were sparse and acoustics unreliable. The lights buzzed softly overhead. He slowed his breathing, syncing it to the rhythm of his steps, attuning himself to the subtle delays between cause and effect. Halfway down the corridor, he stopped abruptly and dropped a coin. Metal rang against concrete, bright and sharp. The sound carried, bounced, faded, and then stuttered, as if swallowed mid-echo. Elias nodded once. He wasn't alone. Threxel watched the object fall, sensors flaring as it intersected the edge of an operative's cloaking field. The human had not looked, had not aimed. The coincidence probability climbed beyond acceptable limits. "Adjust dispersal," Threxel ordered. "Increase distance from the subject." The unit complied, phasing backward in silent retreat. The corridor felt suddenly empty again. Elias frowned. Predators didn't retreat unless they were wounded or cautious. He resumed walking, deliberately casual, and spoke into the quiet as if continuing a private thought. "Relax," he said. "I'm not armed." The words were true in the narrowest sense. Threxel halted the unit. The human's speech patterns suggested intent. Address. Communication. None of which should be possible. Elias reached an access door and placed his palm against the cold metal. He waited, counting heartbeats, then pushed it open. The air pressure shifted. Not much. Enough. You're military, he said softly, still not looking. Too organized to be anything else. Threxel's processors whirred through response matrices. Engagement protocols flickered, then dimmed. The mission parameters did not account for negotiation with a species deemed unaware. Elias stepped into a wider chamber, old and unused, cables snaking along the walls like dormant veins. He stopped at the center and finally turned, slowly, his gaze settling on empty space. Don't worry, he added. I won't scream. Across the city, one operative's stress indicators spiked beyond suppression thresholds. Threxel felt the ripple through the unit like a crack in ice. How? One of them transmitted, the word compressed with disbelief. Threxel had no answer. Elias exhaled, tension easing now that the shape of the threat had edges. You think invisibility is silence, he continued, voice low, conversational. But everything that moves displaces something.
Air. Heat.
Probability. He tapped his temple. Some of us notice. Threxel analyzed the human's physiology in real time. Heart rate elevated, but controlled.
Pupils steady.
No signs of psychosis. No chemical indicators of altered perception. This was not madness. This was adaptation. Species designation. Human. Threxel transmitted to High Command, his confidence eroding with every syllable. Recommend reevaluation of stealth assumptions. The reply did not come immediately. Elias waited, patient now, as if he understood there was an intelligence on the other side of the silence. He leaned back against a support pillar, deliberately exposing his spine, a hunter's trick meant to provoke movement. It worked. A faint ripple passed through the air to his left. There you are, Elias said, not triumphantly, but with relief. Knew you'd hate standing still. Threxel realized too late that the human was mapping them, not visually but spatially, emotionally. Every adjustment, every hesitation, fed his understanding. You're observing us, Elias continued. Not attacking. Which means you're deciding whether we're worth the trouble. Threxel's response lagged by microseconds. Enough. Elias straightened, the easy tone gone. Let me save you some time. He leaned forward, close enough that his breath disturbed the edge of the cloaking field, and whispered, not loudly, not angrily, but with absolute certainty. You are not the first things to hunt us. The reply from High Command finally arrived, cold and precise. Abort observation phase. Human threat classification upgraded. Threxel stared at the human who could not see him and yet had stripped him bare. Elias stepped back, satisfied. He had what he needed, not proof, not allies, but confirmation. The rest would follow. As he turned to leave, he spoke one last time, quiet enough that only something standing very close could hear. You should go, he said. Before we start paying attention. Behind him, the air trembled with indecision. And far above Earth, for the first time in recorded history, an unseen armada hesitated. The city did not change, but the unseen within it did. Where the alien unit had once moved with fluid certainty, they now hesitated, every adjustment weighed against the possibility of being noticed again. Commander Threxel felt the hesitation like static across a shared nerve. Invisibility had always been freedom. Now it was confinement. Elias moved through the streets with intention sharpened into calm. He did not chase. He allowed them to reposition, to believe they were regaining control. Fear, he knew, thrived on imagination. Certainty strangled it. He let them imagine. He entered a crowded transit hub and sat on a bench, hands resting openly on his knees. Trains thundered past, wind curling around bodies that should not exist. Elias listened, mapping pressure wakes and thermal shadows as if reading footprints in snow. 6 shapes. 1 leader. Formation strained. Threxel ordered silence. No micro-adjustments. No corrections. The unit complied, freezing mid-motion as the human's awareness swept the space. It was a gamble, stillness versus detection. The doctrine favored stillness. Elias smiled faintly. You hate this part, he murmured. Standing still feels like surrender. The words struck deeper than any weapon. Threxel's processors flagged anomalous morale degradation. The human statements were not guesses. They were assessments. The realization settled with crushing clarity. The human was not reacting to them.
He was studying them.
Elias rose and walked toward the platform edge. He stopped an arm's length from nothing and addressed it with professional courtesy. "You're the one in charge," he said. "You're keeping them quiet." Threxel's response pathways jammed. Authority acknowledged itself before command could suppress it. A ripple of tension passed through the unit, subtle but present. "Bad habit," Elias continued. "Leaders always think control is invisible." He stepped closer, voice low enough to be intimate. "You should pull them back. Every second you stay, we learn." Threxel initiated a retreat sequence, but Elias was already moving, angling his path not to intercept but to predict. He spoke as he walked, words falling into space like markers. "Left flank's nervous," he said casually. "He wants to run." The operative's stress indicators spiked. Threxel felt it instantly. "Your rear guard keeps compensating for a limp," Elias added. "Old damage." The limp stilled. Elias stopped again, dead center of the platform, and finally raised his voice just enough to carry. Heads turned.
No one saw what he was speaking to.
"That was fine. You think we win by seeing better," he said. "We don't. We win by noticing what doesn't belong." Threxel understood then that retreat was no longer clean. Every movement left a trace, not physical, but cognitive. The human was laying a trail others could follow. And he was right. Across the station, two men adjusted their positions without knowing why. One was a transit security officer who trusted a bad feeling. The other was a plainclothes analyst who had once survived an ambush by listening to the wrong silence. Neither saw anything. Both felt watched. Elias felt them align, peripheral awareness clicking into place. He did not acknowledge them. Pack behavior required no explanation. Threxel received fragmented reports from orbit. Animals reacting. Instruments desynchronizing. Human patterns shifting in response to nothing the sensors could define. The classification algorithm struggled. "This species does not rely on visibility," Threxel transmitted, his certainty gone. "They rely on inference." High Command hesitated. That hesitation echoed through the fleet. Elias took a slow breath and leaned closer to where he knew Threxel hovered. His tone softened, not threatening, not mocking. "You're scared," he said. "That's new for you." Threxel recoiled a fraction too late. The cloaking field rippled. "There," Elias whispered, satisfied. That flinch. The station loudspeaker crackled as a train arrived, drowning out everything. In the chaos, Threxel made a decision that would echo far beyond the platform. "Full withdrawal," he ordered.
"Now."
The unit broke stillness and surged backward in coordinated flight. The sudden displacement rippled the air like a held breath released. Elias straightened and spoke clearly, his voice steady amid the noise. "You can leave," he said. "We won't chase." Threxel paused despite himself. "But don't mistake mercy for ignorance," Elias added. "Next time, we won't be guessing." The unit vanished, phasing upward and away, their invisibility intact, but their certainty shattered. Elias watched the empty air for a long moment, then turned and walked into the crowd, already fading back into anonymity. Above the planet, Alien Command reviewed the data in silence. Stealth models collapsed under new variables. A world once marked as unaware now pulsed with warning flags. On Earth, Elias did not look back. He had planted the seed he wanted them to carry home.
Fear.
And as the unseen armada withdrew into the dark, one final truth settled among them, heavy and undeniable. This planet did not need to see its enemies. It only needed to know they were there. The night passed without incident, which was how Elias knew the incident had already happened. By morning, the distortions were gone. Air flowed the way it always had. Sound echoed when it should. The city felt whole again, as if something unnatural had exhaled and withdrawn. To anyone else, it was just another day. To Elias, it was a conclusion pretending to be silence. He stood on the roof of the facility as the sun climbed, hands resting on the railing, eyes scanning a sky that revealed nothing. Somewhere above that blue vastness, decisions were being made about Earth, decisions that no longer assumed ignorance. Commander Threxel observed the planet from orbit, his form still bent by cloaking fields he no longer trusted. The data scrolled endlessly, each analysis reinforcing the same unacceptable outcome. A species had detected them without seeing them, had engaged without weapons, and had forced a strategic withdrawal using nothing but awareness. This world violates stealth doctrine, Threxel transmitted. Not technologically, cognitively. No one contradicted him. The fleet shifted position, increasing distance, reassessing risk. For the first time in its expansion history, it was not considering how to conquer a world, but whether it should. On the ground, Elias filed a report that said almost nothing. No claims. No accusations. Just a collection of anomalies and a recommendation to study human perception under threat. It would be ignored, debated, archived. That was fine. The important part had already happened. He left the building and walked into the city, letting its noise wash over him. People brushed past, unaware of how close they had come to being catalogued as prey. Elias felt no pride in that. Only relief. Above the planet, High Command issued a final directive. Designation update. Earth, Predator class environment. Engagement prohibited without unanimous council approval. The classification rippled outward, carried along channels that reached worlds far beyond human imagination. Stealth fleets adjusted routes. Invasion plans were shelved. Training doctrines were rewritten with an uncomfortable footnote. Some species do not need sight to hunt. Threxel watched the marker lock into place. Predator class. The term carried weight. It meant unpredictability. It meant losses.
It meant respect.
He replayed the human's final words, not as sound but as intent. Next time, we won't be guessing. The implication was clear. Humanity would not wait to be proven again. On Earth, weeks passed. Life continued. No monuments were raised. No alarm sounded. But small changes took root. Analysts questioned perfect data. Soldiers trusted unease. Engineers studied absence as carefully as presence. Humanity did what it always had, adapted without ceremony. Elias sat in a quiet room one evening, lights low, listening to the city breathe. He knew the universe was larger now, not because of what he had seen, but because of what had seen him. The thought did not frighten him. If anything, it steadied him. Far from Earth, Commander Threxel concluded his report with a sentence he never expected to write. Invisibility is not superiority. It is an invitation. He closed the file and looked once more at the distant blue world, unresolved and watchful. There would be debates. There would be those who argued that humanity was still conquerable, given enough force. But force was loud. And now they knew. Elias leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, letting awareness expand into the dark beyond walls and skies. He did not need to see what might come next. He only needed to listen for the moment the universe shifted again. When it did, he would notice. And so would humanity.